Back in the mid-90s, the world was just captivated by the Asian tiger economies. They were these incredible success stories, symbols of super fast growth. But then, in 1997, it all came crashing down. The roar of the tigers just stopped. It seemed to happen overnight. So, let's get into it. Let's dissect this massive financial meltdown and figure out what really went wrong.
Just look at these numbers. It's a story of a stunning, whiplash-inducing reversal. In just 2 years, you have economies like South Korea and Indonesia going from booming growth to a brutal, deep recession. Indonesia's economy shrank by over 13%. We are talking about a complete, and I mean complete, economic U-turn. So the big question is, how on earth did that happen?
Right. So how does a miracle turn into a meltdown so fast? Was this just some freak accident? Or were there cracks in the foundation this whole time? Well, to really understand the collapse, we have to start with this hidden vulnerability that was lurking right at the heart of their success. It's what we could call the currency trap.
Okay, imagine this for a second. You run a business. You make all your money in, say, Thai baht, but you've taken out all your loans in US dollars. Now, as long as the exchange rate between the baht and the dollar stays exactly the same, everything's cool, right? You're fine. But what happens if it doesn't? This was the massive gamble that entire countries were making. So the policy that set all this up was something called a fixed exchange rate. To get foreign investment pouring in, countries like Thailand and South Korea basically promised to keep their currency's value pegged to the US dollar. For investors, this was fantastic. It seemed super stable, it took away the currency risk, and it made it incredibly cheap for local companies to borrow massive amounts of US dollars.
And this slide right here, this shows you the core of the problem. You have companies earning all their profits in local money. Baht, won, you name it, but their huge debts were all in dollars. For a while, this felt like a golden ticket, a shortcut to massive expansion, but what it really did was leave the entire economy incredibly exposed to any little shift in that currency's value.
And that, of course, is exactly what happened next. International speculators started betting that these countries couldn't hold the line. And they were right. The governments couldn't defend the peg anymore. The Thai baht collapsed, and all of a sudden those dollar debts, they doubled, sometimes even tripled, overnight when you looked at them in the local currency. The result? Total chaos. Widespread corporate and banking failure.
But look, a currency mismatch, as bad as it was, wasn't the whole story. This financial situation was like a pile of dry kindling. The match that lit it on fire was a deep-seated problem with how business was actually being done, what a lot of people started calling crony capitalism. And it caused investor trust to just evaporate.
And if you knew where to look, the warning signs were everywhere. You'd see companies where one single powerful person made all the key decisions. Management structures were murky, almost impossible to understand, and accountability was pretty much non-existent. So when investors started asking tough questions, trying to figure out what was really on the books, they were met with total secrecy. Trust just vanished.
And this wasn't some uniquely Asian problem. This analysis from a similar crisis in Russia shows the exact same pattern. Whenever governance is weak, investors get nervous. They start to worry that their money isn't actually going to be used for growth, but that it's going to get siphoned off to benefit some politically connected insiders. And that fear, it became a self-fulfilling prophecy. So what you have are these two toxic ingredients mixing together. A super fragile financial system built on dollar debt and this total crisis of confidence in how companies were being run. So when the Thai baht started to wobble, foreign investors didn't stick around to ask questions. They ran for the exits. They pulled their money out as fast as humanly possible, not just from Thailand, but from the entire region. It was a bank run, but on a global scale. With their economies in an absolute freefall, these countries turned to the international lender of last resort, the IMF, the International Monetary Fund. But the help they got, well, it came with some serious strings attached. It came with a set of policies so controversial that people are still arguing about them today. So you basically had two competing ideas on how to fix this. On one side, you have the IMF's plan, classic austerity. Their thinking was, we have to stabilize the currency, no matter the cost. So they demanded governments jack up interest rates and slash spending. On the other side was the Keynesian view, which says, no, in a recession you do the exact opposite. You stimulate the economy with lower interest rates and more spending. Well, the IMF chose the path of bitter medicine. And here's the justification, straight from the top of the IMF at the time. Their number one absolute priority was to stop the currency from collapsing any further. They argued that a worthless currency would hurt companies with foreign debt way more than a temporary spike in interest rates would. It was a really painful trade-off. And let me tell you, the pain was immense.
And this wasn't just some abstract economic crisis, it was a political earthquake. The austerity measures led to unbelievable hardship and massive public anger. In Thailand, the government fell. And in Indonesia, the crisis brought an end to President Suharto's 31-year authoritarian rule, right in the middle of mass riots. The consequences were very, very real.
And we can't forget the devastating human cost. Behind all the headlines and the policy debates, millions of people had their lives completely destroyed. This single tragic number from just 3 places, 10,400 suicides, it just captures a tiny fraction of the immense personal suffering this crisis really caused.
So after all that, what did we actually learn? Well, the chaos of 1997 forced a huge rethink of how we should evaluate risk in a globalized world. The lessons from that meltdown have literally been written down into a framework that investors still use to this day.
And what's so fascinating is seeing how the hard lessons from that absolute chaos have now been turned into a system. All those things that went wrong, the governance issues, the political instability, the lack of transparency, these are now formally recognized as core investment risks. The crisis taught the world a tough lesson. You can't just look at the shiny growth numbers. You have to look under the hood at the underlying plumbing of a country's economy.
And this is not just some academic checklist. This isn't just a history lesson. This framework is a direct result of past disasters. And as we're about to see, ignoring these risks, even decades later, can lead to the exact same catastrophic results.
I mean, just look at the collapse of Abraj Group back in 2018. It was the biggest private equity failure ever in emerging markets. And what brought it down? Fraud and mismanagement. The very same kind of governance failures we saw back in 1997. It was this huge, stark reminder that investors have to do their homework, what's called operational due diligence. You have to investigate how a company is run and who is running it, not just look at its financial reports.
So all of this brings us to one final question. The Asian financial crisis was just this brutal, painful lesson in how interconnected and really how fragile our global financial system is. It showed us that hidden debts and weak governance can bring down entire economies with terrifying speed. The question for us today is, with money moving even faster and markets getting even more complex, have we really truly learned to look before we leap?